All right, today we're going to talk about a war that completely changed the game. Imagine this. The most powerful army on the planet, an absolute giant, gets taken down by something totally unexpected, a swarm of regular people.
So how is that even possible? How can ordinary people beat the world's strongest army? Well, the answer takes us back to Spain in the early 1800s. And believe me, it's an amazing story of smart tactics, pure courage, and a brand new style of warfare.
Okay, so to set the scene, you have to know about this one guy, Napoleon Bonaparte. By the early 1800s, he had basically conquered most of Europe. His army was massive, professional, everyone thought they were unbeatable. And his next target? The Iberian Peninsula, which, is Spain and Portugal.
At first, it seemed simple enough. The French army was just passing through Spain to get to Portugal. But then, Napoleon did something really sneaky. In 1808, he just gets rid of the Spanish king and puts his own brother on the throne. And that one move, it was like lighting a match in a room full of gunpowder. The whole country just exploded.
And the Spanish people? Oh, they were not having it. Not at all. I mean, can you imagine? A foreign ruler backed by a foreign army? To them, this was a massive insult to their country, their faith, their entire way of life. For Napoleon, this wasn't just another war anymore. He was now facing a full-blown, nationwide rebellion.
Now, the official Spanish army, they really stood no chance against Napoleon's forces in a straight-up fight. So, the people had to get creative. They came up with a whole new way to fight back, one that didn't need huge armies clashing on some open battlefield. And that's where we get this famous word, guerrilla. It's a Spanish word, and it literally means little war. And that's the perfect description. The whole idea isn't to win one single massive battle. It's about fighting hundreds of tiny little skirmishes to slowly, painfully wear the enemy down. Think about it. These guerrilla tactics flipped every rule of war completely upside down. These fighters didn't wear uniforms so they could just blend in. They didn't try to take on the main French army. Nope, they went for the supply lines, the food wagons, the messengers. They used the mountains and forests they knew like the back of their hands to hide, and they got all their food and intel from local villagers. For the French, it was like fighting ghosts. They were everywhere and they were nowhere all at once.
A classic guerrilla move was the ambush. It was devastating. Here's how it would go down. A small group of fighters would find the perfect spot, maybe a narrow valley or a mountain pass where the French couldn't maneuver. They'd wait, totally silent, for a supply convoy to walk right into the trap. And then, bam, gunfire from all sides. Before the French soldiers even knew what hit them, the guerrillas were gone, just vanished back into the landscape.
So let's flip the perspective. What was all this like for the giant, for the mighty French army? Well, to put it simply, it was a complete nightmare. They had never, ever fought a war like this before. I mean, just imagine being one of those soldiers. Every shadow could be hiding an attacker. The terrain itself was an enemy. The brutal summer heat, the freezing mountains, and maybe worst of all, the entire population hated you. Farmers wouldn't sell you food. People in the villages were spying on your every move. There was literally no safe place to rest.
And if you want to know just how dangerous it got, get this. 200. That's the number of cavalrymen they needed to escort a single messenger from one camp to another. 200 soldiers just to deliver a letter. When it gets that bad, your ability to communicate and control your own army just completely falls apart.
And you can just imagine what that does to your mind. The French soldiers showed up in Spain full of confidence, right? They were the conquerors of Europe. But after years of this constant fear, the hunger, the stress of fighting an enemy you can't even find, their morale just hit rock bottom. It completely collapsed.
But here's a twist. The Spanish weren't fighting all by themselves. Across the water, Napoleon's #1 enemy, Great Britain, saw what was happening and thought, this is our chance. It was a golden opportunity to hit the French Empire where it hurt. So, the British jumped in and helped in 3 really important ways. First, they sent in their own professional army under a super smart general, Sir Arthur Wellesley. Second, their navy basically owned the coast so they could drop off troops and supplies wherever they were needed. And third, they started sending weapons and money to the Spanish guerrilla fighters, which helped keep that swarm alive and angry. And leadership here made all the difference. You see, on the French side, Napoleon's generals were constantly bickering with each other, with no clear plan. But Wellesley? He got it. He saw how powerful the guerrillas were and actually worked with them. He timed his army's attacks to line up with what the guerrillas were doing. So the French were getting hit from 2 sides at once, a professional army and the swarm. It was too much for them to handle. Napoleon himself later had a name for this war. He called it his Spanish ulcer.
What a great description, right? It was this painful, open wound that just wouldn't heal, and it was constantly draining the life and strength right out of his empire.
And that really was the core of the problem for him. This war was a black hole for resources. Just think, while Napoleon is trying to pull off these other huge campaigns, like his infamous invasion of Russia, a massive part of his army and his treasury is just stuck in Spain, tangled up in this never-ending fight.
How massive? How about 300,000? That's a staggering number. 300,000 of Napoleon's soldiers were completely tied down in Spain. These were battle-hardened troops he desperately needed for his other wars, but they were trapped, fighting this unwinnable little war.
And hey, you don't have to take my word for it. Listen to what Napoleon himself said about it later. He basically admitted that the war in Spain was the fatal knot, the one huge mistake that connected all of his other disasters and, in the end, brought him down.
So, after 6 incredibly long and brutal years, the giant finally started to stumble. The combined pressure from the British professional army and that relentless Spanish swarm was just too much. By 1813, the French were finally defeated and driven out of Spain for good.
Okay, so the fighting stopped, but the story doesn't end there. The impact of this very unique war would be felt for a long, long time.
The legacy of this war is just huge. For Spain, it helped create a modern sense of national pride. For the rest of Europe, it was a massive inspiration. It showed everyone that Napoleon could be beaten. And of course, it gave the entire world the term guerrilla warfare. But I think the biggest takeaway is this, and it's something that's still true today. A determined population fighting for their own homes can stand up to and even defeat the most powerful armies in the world.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about, doesn't it? What's ultimately more powerful? A massive, well-equipped army or an idea? An idea like freedom and independence that captures the hearts of an entire nation? Well, the story of the giant and the swarm seems to give us a pretty clear answer.